Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. Last week I asked if we should build the Tamiya Wildone Blockhead. By quite the margin you voted to build it and give it a run. So here we are, we've got the manual ready, let's build. As usual we're going to start slow just in case there's some first time builders, then we'll speed up and run through the build. Having said that, the first couple of steps aren't where Tamiya kits usually start. On the first page, Tamiya tells us what we need to complete the kit, first up being the electronics. We need a transmitter and receiver. I'm going to be using an 8-channel modified GT3C, but you'll be alright even with the most basic 2-channel radio. Next we've got a servo for the steering. The only recommendation would be to get one with metal gears, otherwise any standard size servo will do the job. This one was mostly picked because it's blue to match the body. The kit comes with a Carson ESC, which will work well enough. I think in the States you get a quick run of some sort. Either way, perfectly good ESCs. To power it with the least fuss, we need a 6-cell 9mAh battery with a Tamiya connector. Although, if you're really looking at making a proper runner that's going to be run hard, you're going to want to go for a LiPo pack. So that's the basic setup, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit as I've got a different ESC. In the diagrams you can clearly see a Tamiya TBLE04S, so to make it a bit closer to what Tamiya intended, we've got a TBLE04S. It's really nothing all that special, just a basic brushed and brushless censored ESC, but when peeking under the body it's going to look a little bit nicer than the Carson. Okay, next up we have the tools. We need a couple of sizes of screwdriver. A medium and a small JIS will cover most of the kit. You can get away with Phillips drivers, but you will find it's all too easy to slip and round off the screw heads. You can see the angle of the tip is ever so slightly different. To remove the parts from the parts trees, we need a pair of side or flush cutters. There's some pliers with a fairly narrow tip for the E-clips. Plus a small knife can come in handy, and some scissors to cut the decals from the decal sheet. Other than that, the kit comes with a serviceable Allen key for the grub screws and a cross wrench for the nuts. On the next page we have the do's and don'ts comic, and a basic hookup guide for all the electronics. All good stuff, but it is funny to see the stick radio is still the old 27 MHz set. Right, step 1, charging the battery. Now this assumes you have a slow wall charger, which is fair enough I suppose, but most starter packs or model shops will provide a fast charger of some sort. You'll need to check the manual to see what you're supposed to do, or if you're already into RC you've probably already got a battery ready to go. Right, step 2, side panel stickers. We need the chassis and we need the decal sheet. Now usually kits start with some sort of mechanical step or setting up the steering servo, but here we are starting with stickers. In the bag with the main decal sheet we also get 3 rather nice sets of numbers and 2 fibre reinforced bits that get used to strengthen a thin part of the body. And I nearly missed it, but we also get the standard caution sheet. Right, step 1 for the decals is to roughly cut the ones we need from the sheet. Just be careful not to cut into any neighbouring ones. Then we use some nice sharp scissors, or even a knife, to trim the excess, just leaving the printed part. I'm doing this off camera as it can be a bit tricky to do at arm's reach. The decals go on the side of the chassis and have cutouts that fit around various bits. We need to stick them on nice and straight so everything lines up, which on the face of it might seem a bit tricky. As soon as the decal comes in contact with the chassis, it's gonna stick. There is a trick though that makes it really easy without resorting to soapy water or other liquids like window cleaner. We peel some of the backing off from the decal and trim some away. Now we have some of the sticky exposed with most of it still covered up. We can position the decal so it's spot on, being careful not to let the exposed portion stick. Make sure it's straight and the cutouts are in just the right place. Then gently smooth the sticky bit down and gently remove the rest of the backing, smoothing the rest of the decal down as you go. Then we just need to burnish it with a fingernail so it's evenly and fully stuck down. There are times when other methods do work better, but more often than not this does work a treat. Do the same on the other side and that's step 2 complete. Step 3, light pods. We need the lens sheet, It's a sheet of Lexan with the lenses moulded in, the two yellow R parts trees, and we're going to need to open the metal parts box and find bag A. Now thankfully this kit uses the system where each bag covers a series of steps rather than the older kits where you end up having to find screws and bits from all over the place. Bag A is going to cover steps 1 to 16, only then do we get into bag B. It means there's far fewer screws and small parts on the bench at any time. We'll put all the large parts off to one side since they're going to be safe enough just as they are. For the small parts though, we're going to use some pudding pots so they don't get lost. As we need them, we'll pour the parts out into the pots so we can fish out whatever we need. For this step, it's just 8 2x12 self-tappers. And the first step here would be to cut the lenses free from the sheet. However, the pods can take 5mm LEDs, so for the time being I'm just going to do the minimum so the pods can be fitted to the chassis. We'll revisit them later to add the LEDs and decals. For now we just need to pair up the R1s and R2s and put them together with 2 screws each. Remember, the plastic is fairly soft, so don't over tighten them and strip out the holes. Complete all 4 pods and they're ready to fit when we get to them. Step 4, damper stays and front lights. We'll start by collecting the parts down the left hand side of the diagram. All the parts are drawn actual size, which makes choosing which bits you need rather simple. For this one we need 2 3x15 self-tappers, 4 3x10 self-tappers, 2 black O-rings and the left and right damper stays. Plus of course we're going to need a couple of the light pods. First we'll attach the damper stays with the 3x10s. They sit over 2 holes on each side of the chassis. Start by threading in one of the screws just a few turns so the stay can still move nice and freely. Thread in the second screw and before it tightens down all the way, press the stay with your thumb into the chassis, then nip up the screws. This will more or less guarantee the stay sits nice and straight. Same goes on the other side, just be careful not to over tighten the screws. Just the same as the pods, it's not too difficult to strip out the plastic. In general, you just want to bottom out the screws, then give it an extra little tweak. Any more is a waste of time and risks causing damage. The light pods attach to the front corners of the chassis with the longer screws. We slide the screw in and pop an O-ring over the threads before screwing them into the bottom of the pods. The idea with the O-ring is it adds a little bit of give to the mounting. We only want to tighten the screws enough to slightly squash the O-ring, just enough that the pod doesn't wobble. Do both and that's step 4 complete. Step 5, the front suspension shaft and bumper. We need the bumper, the fiberglass bumper support, the steel front suspension shaft, G1, a small plastic spacer, and E9 and 10, the mounting blocks. For screws we have 1 M3x15 and 2 3x12 self-tappers. We'll start with the M3 screw which goes up through the middle hole in the bumper. Next the fiberglass support goes on, followed by the plastic spacer. Now for the tricky bit, we need to screw the screw into the threaded hole in the middle of the suspension shaft. Make sure you get the thread in straight so it's not cross-threaded and do it up so it's still able to move freely so we can line up all the other holes. On the right side, as we look at the front, we can slide on E10 with the hollow side inwards. It should go all the way to the step on the shaft. To attach, we use one of the self-tappers through the bumper, the support and into E10. Do it up so it's not quite nipped up and repeat on the other side, E9. When all the bits are together, we can tighten up the screws. Now the middle one can be a bit tricky to feel whether it's tight or not. The round steel shaft will press onto the plastic spacer, which has a little bit of give to it. If you over tighten the screw, the plastic part will probably fail after a while, almost being cut in half. Step 6, fitting the assembly to the chassis. We're going to need 4 3x12 self-tappers, 1 3x10 self-tapper, the chassis and the front assembly. If we flip the chassis over, we can offer up the front assembly and fit the 3x10 in the middle hole of the support. We just want it loose for now, just so the structure is a bit easier to handle. Then from the top we install the 4 3x12s. They go through the chassis into the E9 and 10 blocks. and we just need to nip them up. Flip the chassis over and we can nip up the middle screw on the bottom, and that's the front end fitted. And this brings us to the tip on the side of the manual. Where we've cut the silver plated parts from the parts tree, there's a rather unsightly black spot. As the manual says, we can paint over it with some Tamiya X11 chrome silver paint. If you're going pure shelf queen, it would probably be a good idea. However, if you're going to build a runner, I probably wouldn't bother. We might cover up some of the spots later in the build if they're visible from above, but I'm really not too worried. And that's where we're going to leave it for this week. Next week we've got the rest of the front suspension and the dampers to put together, so that should be fun. Right, as always, thanks for watching. Like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!